Hello all, and now I wanted to get back to Kierkegaard and consider some of his main contributions back to where we left off last time with the objective and subjective path towards Christianity, and contending really with the existentialist concern of self-consciousness in a broken world, in a post-industrial world, or ongoing with Kierkegaard, at least in his time. And so the objective path, or the logical, if you will, path, as he describes it, is the sort of historical, deductive reasoning, if you will, of using historical premises or demonstrative evidence forward towards concepts like the incarnation, or simply theological discourse in general. But for Kierkegaard, in his own account at least, he doesn't find historical testimony really as seeing the point of what Christianity fully is or should be, because the incarnation, there is no empirical laws within human nature, or that could be demonstrated on a neutral basis, really, for something like the incarnation. And for Kierkegaard, this is the entire premise of Christianity, by and large, is to be able to actually have faith, or that leap of faith, as it's famously referred to. And for Kierkegaard, there is these paradoxes that you really have to contend with when looking at the unknown, or in this case, the kind of existential concern. The paradox, as the good example, would be the idea of an eternal God. How does an eternal God come into time, and actually interact with it in a way, by being eternal? Then this implies that it couldn't be conceptualized within time, and yet this does happen with the incarnation. How could that be? There is this paradox here. You can see through the Hegelian influence here, or at least up until the point where you get towards there not being a real synthesis for this, for these paradoxes or contraries. So God is either man or an eternal God in time. There's no synthesis really that we can prove out of this. But as for his Kantian lens, or if you will, is where he appropriates the limiting concept, just as Kant with noumena and phenomena, and using that as a basis for being able to make a concept or capitulate in a way where we understand that we don't fully understand, and that it is our own noumena in reaction to the phenomena. That sort of limiting concept you can see reign through with Kierkegaard and his own ideas towards our understanding, or our objective understanding of the incarnation. Which is to say, really, if you want to continue on that Kantian route, there's that limited phenomenon of the thing in and of itself. If you remember with Kant, it's there. There's definitely that object, but how our concepts, or the way we conceive of it is more or less along appearances, and you can also see that well, he was a Lutheran and more into the Orthodox, and so one of the things, of course, that's one of his differences compared to people like Hegel, for example, is the self-consciousness and its own projection is not a projection of the divine. You don't the attributes, if you will, of who we are is not the manifestation of the fullest goodness of the divine or perfection. There's no self-consciousness avenue there. They don't intersect at all. So we can't really know out of that. And that's pretty problematic with some of Hegel's ideas with the self-consciousness and God's self-consciousness. But one of his also main contributions, if I'm going to move on now, is his idea of the stages of life, of life's way, and just like any good philosopher, he offers a three stanza, if you were, of these stages that really make up a sort of synthesis, if you will. It's not just simply a presentation. Or at least the way I see it, it's not simply just this is just a proposition, and then there's negation, and then there's a synthesis. But of course, more in that Hegelian dialectic tradition, which kind of balked at syllogisms like that. But it was more about contraries or polarities. To put it I guess to be less obtuse about it, it's more or less there's not really an order of inference. Like, this isn't just just simply this is stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, all in order and neatly categorized like that. Sorry, but it's more of the thesis. The thesis is contained within the antithesis, and then the synthesis, of course, bridges both of these truths together. And so I think that's one way of looking at it with the stages of life's way. And I think if you look at your peers or even your own life, it's not just necessarily all just in this one linear stage, although there could be properties of the human body or something like that, which kind of dictate that. But temperament and things like that, and seeing wiseness beyond someone's own age or as an example, really. But I'm getting too rambly here, perhaps. But the aesthetic sense which he introduces is the sensitivity, without conscious objective. There's no real ethics beyond sort of hedonism of something that has aesthetic pleasure of the senses, and that sort of enjoyment of perception. But Kierkegaard thinks that can be rather boring, and eventually you will have to deal with melancholy, the hysteria of the spirit of man, who arises out of the unsatisfactory aesthetic sense. Man has a time where his immediacy demands a higher form of spirit. These sort of earthly desires and inclinations or sense appreciation. These earthly desires aren't your highest instantiation of spirit or man. Although, wanting good things and sort of pleasure, there's something to that, or it is a way of life, but it isn't the higher form of life, or transcendence, which is a big theme. So overcoming our earthly existence, that sort of desire, that ethos, the telos, as you will get into, is above the aesthetic sense, and then you introduce the crisis of the spirit, which is of course the self-consciousness of this sense experience can malnourish the creative Geist, for when you use the German terminology, which he was influenced by. But spirit, that creative resource within you, this self-consciousness, births the acting out of a sense of duty, of Kantian ethics. But for the existentialist that Kierkegaard is, though, there is a lot of moral dilemma to come with ethics, and this doesn't really purge deep into moral conundrums, I don't think, or the conscious baggage of who you are and your own experiences, and how they form your own appearances within the world, nonetheless, though, the ethical stage is really assuming roles, traditional roles, as Kierkegaard would describe, of fatherhood or churchmanship, as he was really interested in critiquing the sort of traditional blood ties of churchmanship, where for Kierkegaard, of course, being a good Christian, at least, could be interpreted in his time as simply being born a Dane. And but this doesn't purge into the true moral existential decision making process that comes out of choosing an ethical life. There's the kind of Kantian critique, if you will, of or critique of Kant's ethics, of being a dog to religious dogmas. Sure, you have loyalty from man's best friend, but there's none of that moral ambiguity, and in examples and I guess you would say critiques, thought experiments, if you will, of Kantian ethics. There's a tyrannical regime or something like that, and you're faced with going along with it despite your own consciousness negating it. Are you being at your ethical best, or introducing towards the third stage, that actual self-conscious experience with Christ? Are you actually being morally ethical, if this crosses your existential melancholy, or self-consciousness? And you can see also with his the ethical second stage of the crisis, the sickness of the human spirit, and the imagery of death, and of course, kind of like in a sort of dialectic onto its own, or metaphysic at least, description of Paul with death comes resurrection, and the refulfillment of life onto death. But in regards to some of his other interesting ideas, there's also the teleological suspension of the ethical, which is his way of saying that there's an inner telos of the spirit, perhaps not so much in written within cosmos or in a historical sense or even a nation state. But it goes on within us, in ourselves, with our human desire to go beyond just being told what to do within a structure, but actually indict the structure for its ethical output. And this leads, of course, to his third and final stage, the religious stage. So, death as a resurrection of life continues on the ethic of religious structures or churchmanship. This is, of course, one way of going about it, with perhaps someone who's righted within a structure, who aligns with it in a way that's kind of complementary towards perhaps his second way of that sort of subjective experience of knowing the truth or what is right or the good. And if there's structures or roles that complement it, then of course that is within that sort of third stage. But Kierkegaard, of course, within himself and his own personal life, with his disputes with the church at the time, this is his also way of saying that there is something more than just giving up to structures at hand that perhaps aren't righted in that sort of subjective experience of truth. And there is some rather empowering messages I think you see within his description of a fulfilling existence as someone who can have faith and truth that doesn't just have the structure behind him, but is true to him within himself and his own creative process. And for Kierkegaard, that is the guide to Christianity. I definitely think that you could see his proclivity towards the second way, towards the subjective experience, and with the incarnate coming down onto the flesh, and having faith in it. Of course, if we're going to talk about passion of faith and love, and the proclivities as Hume would describe, which he's using from 18th century influence there, with Hume saying basically the way that human existence or our essences with regards to our temperament and moods, and you just can't logically deduce that you're happy or content on a logical basis, but you feel these passions. Some of them are larger or more extreme or intense than something that could be logically deduced. And if you look in your own life, if you've ever been in love with someone, or had a meaningful relationship, there's lots of times of acts of passion that can be invigorating, or of course could be crushing, certainly. But many times it's not just simply on a rational basis. We don't just think out our actions just in an inference like that, but there's passions. And one of the descriptions that he uses that I really like is nobody has any passion for revolution, which is one of his interesting critiques of the rationalist view in the Critique of Present Age, I think it's called. Logical systems aren't able to really capture the passions like that, and when it comes to getting the treasure out in the dangerous thinning ice in the winter, you need to have passion to be able to go out there and get the reward. If you're just logically deducing all of this, you're probably standing at the side of the snowbank thinking that it's not worth it. But it's those passions, those dispositions, and sometimes other people's passions and dispositions provoke your own ethics and your own perspective. So you can't really just be this grand empiricist, maybe perhaps in your own mind, but there's irrational people who have passion around you who are going to provoke or elicit that sort of response. And I think this is a good segue towards his critique of, likewise, Hegel or some of the others before him, with the creative genius who's has his own amazing spirit or uniqueness. He's the genius that's far out ahead of the masses, away from the herd. Eventually that gets swallowed up not only by someone else's genius or insight, but there's a way with intellectualism where the herd is moving along on these intellectual insights of creative genius, if you will, to where at one time this could have been considered genius, but it's actually a rather rudimentary insight, at least if you go forward 100 years, 200 years, whatever the case may be. And so for Kierkegaard, at least in this polarity of genius, he introduces the apostle. And the apostle, of course, is the man of God, which invokes the authority and that sort of difference between a genius just tapping into his own self-consciousness, but the apostle is on God's behalf, and he speaks of God as opposed to just man and creative genius. So he's invoking that being the apostle is actually a superior way of going about it. And you can see the refutation of liberal theology, which in its time was the gradual evolution of a concept of God in our own life, evolving as our own life unfolds in our own human spirit, which is sort of a rough hashing of Hegelianism, but Kierkegaard is not interested in that. But just as some asides here before, and I do think that is actually a really interesting way, perhaps, to look at a thinker who's his complete opposite, which Friedrich Nietzsche, who could argue is one of the great creative geniuses, certainly of the Western civilization, but perhaps of all time. And his insights and his genius, at the time, which was considered groundbreaking. As we'll see with his insights towards social biology. I don't want to it's actually a high compliment, I would say, in that regard, with a lot of his insights towards social biology and the will to power and idealism and that sort of influence it's taken for granted today, and that influence of overcoming. That's pretty commonplace with most people's disposition, I think, towards there is no objective truth, and there's will, and one's will as guidance towards the truth, certainly you can see that Nietzsche's creative genius eventually moves the herd forward with his own insights. And Kierkegaard, in his looking at Abraham, I think echoes this with we're not able to understand Abraham and and his loyalties or ethics towards God. It's totally foreign to us, and it's precisely because of that intellectualism that helps usher in how we actually think, as a people, or on a greater social scale. And as for if we're gonna take a look at how Kierkegaard is not exactly someone you would turn to for political ramifications or insights into statesmanship or the body politic or something like matters like that. But he is still ultimately talking about concerns of political nature. He doesn't I think you would argue, of course, that going on the path of Christianity is towards the greatest fulfillment. But I do think that there is some echoes that could be useful within his writings and his own biography, if you will, where, and then of course within his own writings itself. But I do think that one of the things that is interesting, of course, with Kierkegaard is anonymity is one of the ways in which he was able to sort of get by, if you will, and escape punishment, and be able to critique the church or critique other thinkers, whatever the case may be. And so, much like today, when it comes to questioning structures or offering perspectives that go against geopolitical interest or something like that, anonymity is necessary for the extension of art, or the extension of the practice of answering these existential dreads or in its annailment of it, and using anonymity, I think, of course, with the digital, as we all do, and looking to not just answer these questions, but actually to probe the process itself into our own concerns with using anonymity as a way of expression of art. And I don't want to get into Nietzsche right away right now, and save it for the next video. But arts and aesthetic appreciation, there's that requirement as a part of being able to describe phenomena within the arts, or existential grievances, if you will, requires stepping out of just I, and more into something like anonymous or pseudonym, or being able to speak truth to power, quite literally. I think that theme echoes all through Kierkegaard's philosophical contributions. And certainly that second, that path B, religious path of questioning structures, questioning ethics. Certainly, that's something that a dissident thinker would be interested in who might be watching this video. And another thing that's rather interesting as well is why isn't a politics more considered in the lines of us actually going about answering these stages of life. I think many for us, we are unable to live this fulfilled life, at least in the way Kierkegaard describes it, simply because we don't have structures that we really align with ourselves with anymore. There's definitely not just a metaphysical vacuum, but one of a reliable organization and structure as a whole that's cohesive or even tangible towards answering that sort of human spirit of wanting to be within a structure ethically, aesthetically, and religiously, and so being towards that path B, as I think a lot of us feel we are, we have a lot of truth to give or perspective to give that doesn't align with ethics or structures at hand, but it's within our own creative spirit, and I think that's a very influential and interesting way of looking at the scene and our politics right now. But yeah, man, this is another 30-minute video. I hope you guys enjoy it. I rambled quite a bit more than usual, and next time we will consider Friedrich Nietzsche and things like will to power, and I hope you guys like, comment, subscribe, and follow me on Twitter. Thanks for watching.